Mindfulness in everyday life, taking a breathing space. Mindfulness is neither difficult nor complex. Remembering to be mindful is the great challenge. Christina Feldman. Those of us who attempt to nurture greater mindfulness in our lives sooner or later discover that it is most difficult to be mindful at just those times when mindfulness would be most helpful. When the pressure is on, when we're feeling bad, when there doesn't seem to be a moment to spare, these are the times when being mindful can be a major challenge. They are also the times when we need it most. Mindfulness is at least as much about ordinary daily living as it is about making some quiet time for formal practice. In fact, we could say that ultimately life itself is the practice. There is no waking moment in which we might not be more alive and more in touch if we were more aware. So, the real work of mindfulness actually starts with life itself, with all its twists and turns, in all its guises and disguises. This is especially so when life is particularly difficult, when it is hard going, when the mind is all over the place. At such times, we most need the stability, the clarity, and the insight that mindfulness offers. In this chapter, we gather together the threads of all we've learned so far to see how we can weave our discoveries into the fabric of our daily lives. From the outset, both the Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction MBSR program and the Mindfulness Based Cognitive Therapy MBCT program emphasize the importance of bringing mindfulness to everyday life. They invite us to pay attention to routine activities such as brushing our teeth, feeding the cat, and taking out the garbage. To walk mindfully when we are walking. To use sensations in our body as a way to stay aware and present in each moment. And to support mindfulness of any experience by breathing with it. The MBCT program also offers a special tool that is specifically designed to bring mindfulness into our everyday lives, particularly at the tipping points when our mood is beginning to go down. The tool is a mini meditation called the 3-minute breathing space. In MBCT, it is always used as the first step in dealing with difficult situations and feelings. In the breathing space, the entire teaching of the MBCT program is concentrated in 3 steps. Many of those who have participated in the program have singled this practice out as the most useful feature of the whole course. When so many of our daily tasks seem to require doing modes critical thinking, this practice offers a quick and surprisingly effective way to switch to the being mode when we most need to do so. One way to experiment with this would be to start by reading the following instructions all the way through, then diving in and taking a 3-minute breathing space right now. You may find it helpful to spend about a minute on each of the 3 steps, or you might want to vary the times, for example, by spending somewhat longer on step 2. At first, we practice this breathing space for 3 minutes at set times, 3 times a day in a rather formal way. But once we have the hang of it, it can be deployed anytime, anywhere, for the duration of 1 or 2 breaths to 5 to 10 minutes as conditions permit. Soon, we may find we are using it to some degree or another in many situations. such as when we notice unpleasant feelings or a sense of tightening or holding in the body, or feelings of being overwhelmed by events. In such situations, when low mood threatens to overwhelm us, the breathing space allows us to steady ourselves. It allows us to see clearly what is happening through direct experiential knowing. It provides a place from which we can choose mindfully what next steps are required by the situation we find ourselves in. The 3-minute breathing space is used as the first step in responding to whatever challenging situations and feelings arise in a particular moment. The 3-minute breathing space. Step 1. Becoming aware. Begin by deliberately adopting an erect and dignified posture, whether you are sitting or standing. If possible, close your eyes. Then, bringing your awareness to your inner experience, ask, what is my experience right now? What thoughts are going through the mind? As best you can, acknowledging thoughts as mental events, perhaps putting them into words. What feelings are here? Turning toward any sense of emotional discomfort or unpleasant feelings, acknowledging their presence. What body sensations are here right now? Perhaps quickly scanning the body to pick up any sensations of tightness or bracing. Step 2. Gathering. Then redirect your attention to focus on the physical sensations of the breath, breathing itself. Move in close to the sense of the breath in the belly, feeling the sensations of the belly wall expanding as the breath comes in and falling back as the breath goes out. Follow the breath all the way in and all the way out, using the breathing to anchor yourself in the present. Step 3. Expanding. Now expand the field of your awareness around your breathing so that, in addition to the sensations of the breath, it includes a sense of the body as a whole, your posture, and facial expression. If you become aware of any sensations of discomfort, tension, or resistance, zero in on them by breathing into them on each in-breath and breathing out from them on each out-breath as you soften and open. If you want to, you might say to yourself on the out-breath, "It's okay. Whatever it is, it's already here. Let me feel it." As best you can, bring this expanded awareness into the next moments of your day. In the first step of the breathing space, we are asked to come fully into the present moment and step out of automatic pilot, out of doing mode. We intentionally suspend our usual habits of self-critical judgment. We let go of trying to get somewhere other than where we already are. We practice restraining our usual tendency to fix what the doing mind thinks needs fixing. We simply acknowledge and bring awareness to what is already here in this moment as it is. Sustaining this open stance of acknowledging and attending can be very difficult. Old habits of thinking have well worn grooves that can easily carry us away. So we take the second step of gathering and focusing our mind on a single object. The sensations of breathing, just this breath coming in, just this breath going out. In this way, we give ourselves a chance to steady the mind and to remain right here, right now. Having gathered ourselves in this way, we take the third step. We expand the field of awareness to include the whole body. We enter the spaciousness of the being mode, and as best we can, allow that wider domain of being to be with us when we return to what we were doing. These three steps help us shift seamlessly from the mode of doing to the mode of being. For most of us, bringing mindfulness into the busyness of everyday life may turn out to present a big challenge. The breathing space was developed to allow a deliberate change of stance toward what is going on in any moment. In a potentially difficult situation, this shift in mode may be essential for an effective and appropriate response. For this reason, the 3-minute breathing space is more structured and directive than many of the other practices described so far. In particular, we start with a definite change in posture, and we remind ourselves that there are 3 different stages to the practice. For example, by using the phrases step 1, step 2, and step 3. The use of such an explicitly structured approach to the instructions is not accidental. The shorter a practice, the more likely the tendency for it to become merely a brief timeout, snatched in the midst of an ongoing crisis, rather than a major shift in our mode of mind, from doing to being. It might help to think of the path that your attention travels in the breathing space as having the shape of an hourglass. An hourglass has a wide opening, a narrow neck, and a wide base. This image can remind us to open to experience as it is in step 1, to gather attention, to focus on the breath in step 2, and to open to a sense of the body as a whole in step 3. Think of your attention during the breathing space as traveling a path with the shape of an hourglass. The breathing space needs to have the qualities of a sharp and discerning sword. Used with compassion, it can cut through the doing mode to provide us with a powerful and healing alternative. The practice can open up new freedom and choice about how best to respond to what is happening in our lives, inwardly and outwardly, while it is happening. The breathing space forges an explicit link between the formal practices described in the preceding chapters and daily life. Like an embroidery needle, it picks up the threads of the learning that naturally unfolds during regular formal practice and weaves them into the fabric of everyday life. The breathing space's step 2, gathering, is like a concentrated version of mindfulness of the breath. Step 3, expanding, resonates with the formal practices of widening the attention around the breath to include a sense of the body as a whole and embracing a difficulty. The significance of step one may be less apparent, so let's look at this aspect more closely. Awareness and acknowledgement. Becoming aware is the first move in taking a purposeful breathing space. The aim of this step is to use the power of mindfulness to disentangle ourselves from the doing, ruminative mode, to drop into a feeling, sensing, knowing, being mode, to acknowledge or witness our thoughts, feelings, and body sensations as we rest in awareness of them. Perhaps because the practice is called the breathing space, the tendency is to go straight to the breath. But the first instruction does not even mention the breath. Instead, we are invited to become aware of our posture and intentionally allow it to express a sense of dignity, of taking a stand in our life, in our body, to whatever degree may be possible in this moment. In this way, we are tuning the instrument for stepping out of automatic pilot mode and acknowledging whatever is going on right now. This stepping out of autopilot and into awareness is inextricably linked. The instructions for step 1 next invite us to focus our attention inward and to acknowledge our experience of thoughts, feelings, and body sensations, in turn, in that very moment. We start with thoughts because most often that is where our minds are likely to be focused as we begin the breathing space. We focus on body sensations last, as this then provides a natural transition to focusing on the body sensations of breathing in step 2. It may come as a surprise to know that this very act of parsing or sorting of experience into these three aspects, thoughts, feelings, and body sensations, is in and of itself of great importance. Although we may initially perceive an unpleasant experience as an undifferentiated bad thing, a big black blob that we just want to be rid of, if we attend to it more closely, we will generally find that it can be recognized as an interlinked pattern of thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. Becoming aware of the separate components of the pattern in this way can be invaluable in and of itself. The mind will respond differently in new and potentially more creative ways to the perception of a complex mosaic of distinct experiences than it will to the perception of a uniform hated thing. Like many other participants in the program, Malcolm first became aware of the power of parsing his experience while using the pleasant and unpleasant events calendar described in Chapter 6. Because he also happened to be a psychologist, Malcolm knew very well intellectually that emotional experiences can be broken down into these three aspects. But as he undertook the simple exercise of attending to each component, he was staggered by the difference that it made to know this experientially. Suddenly, he was able to relate to unpleasant experiences as simply bundles of thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. Identifying less personally with his response to unpleasant events, he found the whole situation became lighter, more spacious, freer. The first step of the 3-minute breathing space provides a way to bring the same shift in perspective to one degree or another to any aspect of our experience. Intentionally separating an unpleasant experience into thoughts, feelings, and body sensations allows the mind to respond more creatively than it would to the perception of an event as monolithic, impenetrable, and overwhelming. The first step of the breathing space also provides an opportunity to fully acknowledge our experience in the moment, as Matthew discovered. I was once on a work trip and my wife had come with me. The evening before the meeting, I was ironing some clothes and my wife was reading on the other side of the room behind me. I was tired and feeling a little anxious about how the next day would go. Was I sufficiently prepared? I found some resentment creeping into my mind. Here I was ironing when I could be preparing more for tomorrow. If my wife would only help me out a bit. There she was, just reading. I recognize this as a not very helpful thought stream. I think of myself as a modern man who takes care of his own needs. I told myself that my wife had every right to be enjoying her holiday, and so it was appropriate for me to take responsibility for my own clothes. But somehow, a part of me did not seem satisfied with this. Soon, another thought appeared. But this is a very important meeting, and this is one occasion when I should not have to be ironing when I could be preparing. Why can't she see my predicament and offer to help me? The resentment and irritation were rapidly mounting. The Vietnamese meditation teacher Thich Nhat Hanh talks about doing activities just to do them. For example, doing the dishes just to do the dishes and not just to get them finished to rush on to the next activity. Here was a perfect opportunity to practice his teaching. Right, focus on the ironing, the texture of the cloth, the smell of hot steam, the movement of the iron. Then the next thought arose. No, I should not have to be using my mindfulness practice to cope with this ironing. I should not have to be doing the ironing at all. I tried to focus again, gritting my mental teeth. Focus on ironing, the smell of the steam, the feel of the cloth. No use. The thoughts came streaming back. It was at that moment that I remembered the breathing space. The first step was not focusing, but acknowledging. I became aware that I was trying to use meditation to change things. I had not acknowledged the situation in its entirety. Here was the ironing. Here was the resentment. Here were the thoughts. Acknowledging meant allowing all of it to be present as it was, and as the breathing space unfolded, to be able to say inwardly to myself, it's okay. Whatever it is, it's already here. For me, this meant giving up the struggle to be good, to be politically correct, and to acknowledge that at that moment I felt really resentful, and to say it's okay to feel this way. Of course, this felt dangerous, as if it would allow my resentment to get out of hand. In fact, amazingly, it dropped away. Why? Because for the first time in that little scene, I guess I had acknowledged the whole thing. I had seen what was really happening rather than obsessing about what I thought should be happening. As it turned out, I need not have been too concerned about preparing for the meeting. During that night, some people came into our hotel room as we slept and stole most of our possessions, including our computers, diaries, credit cards, and money. At the meeting the following day, somehow ironing or how prepared I was did not seem that important. Matthew reported later that he had originally thought he was acknowledging what was going on and taking action. But then he said he realized that his acknowledgement was only partial. He recognized that he was attempting to use the practice to escape or fix or dispel his bad mood. The change in his mood came about only when he was first able and willing to hold all aspects of what was going on in awareness, including his resentment, with full acknowledgement. As we saw in Chapter 7, the shift from rejecting a situation or condition to accepting it as it is, because it is already as it is essential to responding skillfully to a difficult or unpleasant situation. Often, wholehearted acknowledgement of what is already present may actually be all that is necessary, as Matthew discovered for himself by staying with the process. Sometimes, just acknowledging what's actually going on instead of dwelling on what should be happening is all that is needed to transform our experience. The first step of the breathing space provides a structured, systematic way to do just that, namely, acknowledge wholeheartedly what is already the case. The second and third steps allow that shift in perspective to be consolidated and stabilized. Using the breathing space. We need to be cautious of a potential pitfall in the way we use the breathing space. It is easy to see it as merely a timeout, a brief moment when we can retreat and relax before advancing again into the busyness of our lives. Although it may have some short term benefits along these lines, the timeout approach is not as helpful in the long run as the shift from doing to being mode, because it does not alter our feelings of being under stress and pressure. It is best to see the breathing space as an opportunity to bring awareness to whatever is going on at this moment, to notice and step out of the routine we have become caught up in, so that we might relate differently to whatever difficulty we could be facing. What is the difference between taking a break and taking a breathing space? An analogy may help. Most of us have at some time been caught in a severe downpour and have had to run for shelter, perhaps in a shop doorway. Sometimes we are simply glad to be out of the rain. We stand for a while hoping it will stop. We are dry at the moment, but as the rain continues, we know that sooner or later we are going to have to face it. The thing we tried to escape is still here. Finally, in one scenario, we go back out into the rain, grumbling, even cursing our luck as the rain drenches us. At other times, another scenario might unfold for us. We may take shelter in a very different way. We stand in a doorway for a while, aware of the prospect of getting soaked and not liking it much. We notice that we are hoping that it will stop, but seeing that it shows no sign of stopping, realize that being upset about it and worrying about how soaked we are going to get is only adding to our discomfort. So we stop clinging to the hope that it will stop raining and enter the downpour, letting ourselves be drenched and accepting that this is what is happening at the moment. Approaching the situation in this way may allow us to experience the rain itself. We may notice that there is something rather compelling about the way it is splashing off everything it hits. The rain has not stopped. We may be getting wetter and wetter, but our relationship to what is happening has changed the whole experience. The analogy of seeking shelter from a rainstorm evokes the markedly different ways in which any meditative practice can be used, either as a clever way of hiding from difficult experiences, hoping that they will go away, or as a way of turning to face them, changing the way we relate to them. The breathing space is more than a timeout, a time when we take shelter, gritting our teeth and hoping the storm will pass. By stepping out of automatic pilot, we allow ourselves to hold as objects of our attention everything in the here and now. This includes our breath and body sensations and the jumble of our feelings and thoughts. As we do this, we may find that our awareness of these feelings or thoughts brings with it a fresh and transformative perspective. Suddenly, we are inhabiting a wider view of our experience rather than being so caught up in it. This was Elisa's experience of the breathing space. I use it especially when there is pressure and things happening and I want to get centered. Ah, there it is, my breath. And then I step into it. A couple of times in the last week, I have had to do it intentionally after going into a mood almost involuntarily. A negative reaction, which is where my depression comes from usually, turning everything so black, so bad. And so to refocus myself out of this, I just stop for a second. I use it just to keep me right where I am instead of reacting to the situation, to actually stay in it. Elisa discovered that she does not have to react to her bad moods by assuming they are telling the truth about what is going to happen. In the past, when I've felt overwhelmed, thinking, I'll never get better, this is going to go on forever, I've thought, that's how it is going to be. It is all over now. Now, it's different somehow. It means I can actually realize, well, hang on, it's not over yet. In some cases, it hasn't even started, so let's just stick around and see what's actually going on. Doing this instead of letting my head determine that for me. It takes some practice for the 3-minute breathing space to serve as an effective, practical way to pause and gather ourselves in the midst of troubling situations. That is why it is useful to begin by scheduling time for a breathing space at 3 specific times during the day for a week. That can get us launched into using it not only at pre programmed times, but also whenever we feel we most need it, such as when we feel under particular stress. The aim is for the 3-minute breathing space to become an important vehicle for bringing the growing power of our formal meditation practice into our daily life. Although we call it the 3-minute breathing space, it is important to see that the precise form and duration of the breathing space can be tailored to the constraints of any situation in which we find ourselves. If we can take ourselves to a quiet place such as the restroom, we can indulge in the luxury of a full 3-minute mini meditation with eyes closed if we find that helpful. But if we are in the middle of an argument, stuck in a traffic jam, trapped in a meeting, or shopping in a supermarket, we will need to accommodate flexibly and creatively to the realities we encounter. We might have to keep our eyes open, compress the sequence into less than 1 minute, or gather our scattered attention on our footfalls as we walk rather than keep our focus on the breath. The most important thing is that we have some understanding of what we are intending to do. Then we can experiment with as many ways of doing the breathing space as our life demands. Just keeping in mind that a breathing space is always available to us profoundly affects many aspects of our lives. If the breathing space is practiced regularly, we may find that stepping out of automatic pilot, followed by intentionally implementing the 3 steps, becomes a great ally in bringing mindfulness into everyday life. It can help us deal skillfully with the difficult and distressing affairs of life, and also to become more appreciative of the many positive features of our lives in all those moments that would otherwise pass us by. Not trying to fix things. Like all meditation practices, the 3 minute breathing space requires a kind of effort. But if we are too goal oriented about it, our very striving may only increase our difficulties, as Tara discovered. In her case, it was because she perceived the breathing space as too short. I was conscious that it should just be 3 minutes, she explained. So it just feels like I have got to rush in there and think about, what I've got to think about, settling down, and then I'm sort of panicking that I'm going to miss the 3 minutes. I can't relax. The breathing space itself can actually become a source of aversion if it is practiced in the spirit of fixing things. Tara realizes on her own when she noticed that she was harboring an expectation that she had to do it right. If it was to work to calm her down, she decided to take a different approach, saying to herself, "Okay, remember, there is no goal here. All I have to do is note inwardly what is going on: thoughts, feelings, body sensations. Bring my mind to the breath and the belly, and then to a wider awareness, including the body as a whole. If I do that, that's fine. I've done what I have to do. The rest will take care of itself." For Tara, as for any of us, our challenge and our responsibility in this simple practice is simply to give ourselves over to it as best we can, remembering that what matters is our orientation toward the present moment, what we bring to it. What we get out of it is not under our control. It is part of the adventure to observe compassionately as best we can and see what comes of stopping and dropping in on ourselves in this way in the midst of our daily lives. That is all. In this way, when we are plagued with thoughts such as, "This is not working," or "I don't have the time," or "I'm obviously not doing it right," we begin to see that these thoughts are exactly what we need to become aware of and exactly what we need to acknowledge. If we are motivated to undertake the challenge of waking up to our lives, we only need to remember to take the time to use the breathing space and then to give ourselves over to it as best we can in any given moment. One way of expressing this is to say that each of us is responsible for the input. We do not need to worry about the outcome, especially about whether it is quote unquote working. The invitation is to be patient and to persevere in the practice and see what happens. As with all meditation practices, if we find ourselves setting goals for the breathing space, we'll revert from being mode back into doing mode. As she practiced the breathing space for the next week, Tara decided that it was worth trying to bring to it a sense of allowing. She decided that she didn't have to do it well or achieve any particular result. Just putting it into practice would be enough. When she returned for the next session of the class, she was intrigued by what had happened. "I noticed sensations," she said. "Whether they were there all along and I didn't notice them, or whether they are new, I don't know. But I can certainly feel the physical sensations of anxiety like I haven't felt before. My suspicion is that they were there all along." At this stage in her account, it was not clear how things would turn out for Tara, but her experience did suggest that allowing the physical sensations of anxiety to be held in awareness gave her opportunities to know them in new ways and thereby to see new aspects of them. She calls it their ebb and flow. I think my body makes me aware of them, Tara said. And then I can focus on them and, feel what's going on. I had never really paid attention to what is going on physically before. I've certainly been familiar with paying attention to the thoughts, but never the sensations. That changes everything. It doesn't necessarily make things worse or better, but there is an ebb and flow, an ongoing change in texture and feeling. The breathing space reminded Tara of one of the central messages of the whole mindfulness program: to learn how to relate differently to the constantly changing patterns in the mind and the body, to hold the recurrent patterns of both mind and body in the accepting and open hearted embrace of awareness, especially at those times when we feel tired or down or anxious, when the mind's reactivity and old habits are likely to be most overwhelming. Tara's words sum it up well. I can see the value in noticing that it does ebb and flow and change on its own, and that I don't have to fix it. It's being with it and not being more afraid of it. When things are hectic, Hannah found that she could practice the breathing space when she was calm, but she found it much more difficult when things got hectic. It's easy when I'm relatively calm. It's also okay when you can see a bad big black cloud coming and take yourself in hand and do it. But yesterday and today, I have been really busy. Everything's been rushed. I've been going backward and forward and up and down the escalator. Hannah is sensing that everything is hectic. In this situation, the practice becomes drawn unwittingly into the whirlpool along with everything else she has to do. And she criticizes herself for not remembering to use it. It's been awful, she said. And I should have been breathing and steadying myself, but it was all too frantic, and I didn't even think about it today. Things overtook me. In making shoulds for herself, Hannah's doing mind is importing tension into any decision she might make about whether to practice or not. Instead of simply practicing a 3-minute breathing space when the impulse arises, she ends up only thinking about it. Here we see the doing mode in all its splendor, measuring the gap between how things are and how they should be, and then trying to close the gap. The practice has become a victim of thinking and striving. Mindfulness is inviting and forgiving. We now arrive at the critical point. It seems easiest to be mindful at the times when we least need it. Then, when we most need it, our capacity to meet the moment with mindfulness seems to evaporate. If we wish to sidestep this vicious cycle, we need to build up new attitudes to counterbalance our old habits. Whenever we feel hassled, that is the perfect moment to take a breathing space. Even if we only manage to do it after the fact rather than during whatever is happening, this will help us build new ways of seeing, knowing, and responding to stressful situations. This might mean taking a breathing space after that aggravating phone call, if not during it, or while we're rehashing some difficult incident that we wish had gone differently. So, even if we realize at the end of the day, oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock at night and I haven't actually been in touch with my body or the breath once today, there and then, right in that moment, as soon as we become aware of it, we can take a breathing space. That moment is a moment of realization and is now the perfect moment to practice and to implement the breathing space. Without our having to worry about it or force it, the practice itself will influence in ways both little and not so little our relationship to how our life is unfolding. With continued practice, the habits of a lifetime of operating in the doing mode will attenuate and dissolve in the spacious, accepting embrace of mindfulness. In this way, each time we take a breathing space, we are building up increments of a new learning. So even if we think, oh, I haven't done my practice for several days, we can seize that very moment and practice. We may think, there's no point. I've missed too much. I might as well pack it in, give up. Those thoughts can then serve as our cue, as a reminder to practice. Otherwise, a spiral of rumination has an opportunity to take hold right then and there as we berate ourselves for not doing what we are supposed to be doing. Ironically, that cycle of rumination might last at least 3 minutes. One more instance of being subverted by the coulda, shoulda, woulda, oughta mentality, or choosing not to be. Whenever we feel hassled, it is helpful to take a breathing space, even if after the fact. Mindfulness practice is very forgiving. It beckons us to start over again, time after time after time, without judging us for the times we haven't managed to remember to drop in on ourselves. So, we do it whenever and wherever we can, as a gesture of kindness toward ourselves. This orientation and an ongoing willingness to practice now, whatever happened or didn't happen in that regard in the past, will strengthen the likelihood that the next time when we really need to be fully present, the breathing space will immediately suggest itself as a skillful option. Choices we can make after taking a breathing space. It is helpful to think of the breathing space as a door through which we can pass through from the hot, murky, cramped, driven places in our minds to a lighter, cooler, more accommodating space. If we see the breathing space as always the first step in a more mindful response to unpleasant feelings of unhappiness, anger, fear, and the like, then our initial focus need only be on that one door. But once through that door, once we have entered a different space in our minds, a number of other doors lie before us, leading onward. Each door offers a different option for further mindful responding, and we are invited to make a conscious choice of which door to open next. Our choices may be severely constrained by the situation in which we find ourselves. Even so, we always have the option of returning later to these possibilities to expand and deepen our practice. Option 1. Re-entry. The simplest option after we've completed the third step of the breathing space is to leave it at that. With a new mode of mind in place, we mentally re-enter the difficult situation that prompted us to take the breathing space. We may find the negative thoughts, the unpleasant feelings, the intense physical sensations, the shouting boss, or the screaming child are all still here. But the fact that we can approach them now in being mode from a gathered, deliberate, more spacious, and less self centered perspective can make all the difference. We can now approach them matter of factly, responding skillfully to the needs of the moment rather than reacting automatically in ways that will simply compound the difficulties we experience. Once we are in this mode of mind, its inherent wisdom may make the next step we need to take much clearer. And we can support this wiser mode by staying mindfully present as best we can, grounded in awareness of our bodily experience in each moment. Sometimes the change is very subtle. One participant reported, "On Wednesday, I woke up feeling rotten. I hadn't slept well. I was tired and thick headed. I had a day of work ahead of me. I could feel the old familiar feelings of desperation rising up. As I was lying there feeling miserable, some part of me remembered my breath, and I took a breathing space. After it, I lay in bed for a while, just watching my breath and tuning into the sensations in my body. It seems odd, but I felt different after that. I still felt tired, thick-headed, and fed up, but it didn't seem like such a disaster. Although the shift in feeling tone may be a subtle one, it actually represents a huge and crucial change in mode of mind. And every tiny shift of this kind, no matter how subtle, can open up new possibilities for what happens next. It may mean working on your to do list one task at a time rather than getting overwhelmed by all the things left undone. It may mean ending a frustrating phone call feeling aggravated, but not demeaned or disrespected. It could mean feeling regretful about snapping at a colleague without having the feeling that you should beat yourself up over it again and again during the rest of the day. Maybe it means just feeling down when something reminds you of a recent loss, but not adding anger at the situation or yourself, not descending into, I'll never get over this, doomsaying. Of course, we always have the option, if time permits, of building on this new learning by going around again, taking another breathing space to consolidate the shift to the new, more mindful mode of mind. But the danger here is that we could end up approaching the breathing space in a goal oriented way, as a tool to fix a difficult situation. From this perspective, if the first breathing space did not work in getting rid of unwanted feelings, we might be tempted to try again, perhaps even harder this time. The risk here is that the attempt to fix things actually becomes a part of the problem. The failure of the first and possibly subsequent attempts to get rid of negative feelings generates more negative feelings. This is the exact opposite of mindfulness. If we choose to repeat the breathing space, we have to make sure we're not trying to use it as a quick fix, the opposite of mindfulness. We may find that we need to explicitly remind ourselves quite frequently that the aim of the 3-minute breathing space is not to dispose of all negative states, instantly or otherwise, but to allow us to access a mode of mind in which we can be with them more effectively and with greater clarity. Although this may not immediately eliminate whatever it is that we don't want to continue happening, it will give us the freedom and wisdom to respond in ways that may allow unpleasant feelings and difficult situations to resolve rather than perpetuate themselves. At the very least, we can cease feeding them and compounding the suffering. If we wish to explore the option of using several breathing spaces back to back, it might be wise to limit ourselves to 2 cycles of it on any one occasion. We might keep in mind that the breathing space used properly is merely a method for reminding us of what it would mean and how it would feel to embody mindfulness in the face of whatever is arising. Option 2, the body door. As we have emphasized many times, disturbing experiences carry an unpleasant feeling tone. There are negative feelings such as dread or sadness, and often a reaction of aversion or resistance to them, not uncommonly expressed in changes in the muscles of the face or body, such as frowning, tightening of the neck, jaw, and shoulder muscles, or tensing of the lower back. All of these can be directly attended to, and our primary strategy for transforming our relationship to difficult emotions is to work within this domain of awareness. So, if following an initial breathing space, we choose to work further on our emotions, it is natural to turn our attention toward what we are feeling in the body. As a first step, we direct as best we can a friendly, open attention to the part of the body where we experience the most intense physical bodily sensations. One way to do this is to use the breath to carry the attention, breathing into the area on each in breath, breathing out from the area on each out breath, as we learn to do in the body scan. With each out breath, any sense of tightness, bracing, or resistance may release or soften naturally. Where this occurs, the tension and sense of holding on often dissolved with the out breath, although by no means are we trying to make this happen. If it happens, that's fine, but it's equally fine if it does not. The simple act of bringing awareness to the sense of aversion and resistance is enough without becoming fixated on achieving relaxation. We may find it helpful to remind ourselves of the general intention to allow and accept our experience by saying in our minds, softening, opening, embracing. The tension we notice in a particular area of the body may naturally soften with the out breath if we don't try to force it to do so. Once we have brought attention to the physical bodily manifestations of any resistance or aversion we may be feeling, we can explore a number of options for staying connected with our feelings. Staying in touch with them allows for the possibility of their being met and held in new and different ways. One is simply to continue breathing with awareness of the sensations, perhaps having the sense of holding them in a soft, wide, and spacious awareness. Another option is to investigate in detail with a narrower, intentionally more focused attention, where the area of intensity begins, where its edges are, where the sensations are most intense. How, if at all, the sensations change from one moment to the next. Whatever option we choose, we expend some effort to keep our awareness alive and to nurture it. We can do this by intentionally infusing it with qualities of interest, investigation, goodwill, and compassion. If we find that we have drifted into an attitude of forcing or striving, we can gently but firmly disengage from it. Plus, we can always refresh and enliven our minds by opening and widening the field of awareness to include other senses in the moment, such as sounds, the fragrance of the air, or the feeling of it on the skin. We can approach any negative feelings in the same way. We may find it helpful to remind ourselves to cultivate an accepting, allowing relationship to these feelings by saying to ourselves, "It's okay. Whatever it is, it's already here. Let me be open to it." We might pay particular attention to any changes in the qualities of those feelings as we hold them in awareness. With intensely unpleasant feelings, we might find it helpful to use the strategy of working the edge. As explained earlier, this means bringing attention as far into the intensity of the experience as we can, and then maintaining it with a light touch as best we can, moment by moment. When the intensity begins to feel overwhelming, we can gently, in the spirit of self-compassion, shift our attention bit by bit towards some other more stabilizing and benign focus. For instance, we might steady ourselves and regroup by focusing on the movements of the breath until we feel ready to approach the area of greater intensity again. We can do this by focusing on the breath by itself or together with awareness of the unpleasant feelings and sensations in the background, breathing with. By testing the water in this way, we can develop a progressively more accepting relationship to intensely unpleasant experiences. This in itself is a path of both wisdom and compassion. Michelle found herself feeling drained just thinking about an upcoming family reunion. I keep telling myself that it should be nice to visit with everyone after all this time, she said. But when I think of booking my flight, I can't seem to follow through. Back at home the next day, the thought, I should get it booked, came into her mind once again. Instead of forcing herself to call the travel agent right then and there, she decided she would first take a breathing space. A few minutes into it, Michelle noticed increased pressure in her chest and tightness in her throat. The thought that her father would be coming to the reunion with his new partner, Jean, seemed to increase the intensity of these sensations. Ordinarily, Michelle would have turned away from looking at this thought pattern more closely, telling herself that it was up to her to do the right thing for the family. This time, however, she was able to recognize her aversion as being an all too familiar response and decided instead to approach the edge of her discomfort. Once she had connected with her breath at the belly, she moved her attention to her throat and began to breathe into the tightness. What she discovered was that these sensations were not static. They came and went. The tightness gave way to a feeling of strain in her neck muscles, and this would sometimes ease as she breathed out from this region. She noticed that the thought, "You ought to welcome Jean into the family," was quickly followed by, "How could he be so insensitive? It's only been 6 months since Mom passed away." Now, her throat felt slightly blocked and squeezed. Still, she continued breathing as anger and hurt registered in her mind, and then sadness and loss over her mother. "Even though I don't know what I'll end up doing," she said, "just letting this stuff in right now is a way that I can care for myself. Maybe that's a start." Working the edge is a good way to test the water when an experience is so unpleasant that aversion is likely to take over. Option 3. The thought door. In the first step of the breathing space, we may become aware that emotionally charged thoughts are the most salient feature of our experience. From Chapter 8, we may recognize among these some of our recurring patterns of negative thoughts. If these thoughts are still a dominant feature of your experience as you complete Step 3 of the breathing space, you have the option of opening the thought door by making a deliberate decision to relate differently to your thinking. This may involve writing down the thoughts, watching the thoughts come and go, viewing your thoughts as mental events rather than as facts, relating to thoughts in the same way that you would to sounds, identifying a particular thought pattern as one of your recurring old mental grooves, gently asking yourself, am I overtired? Am I jumping to conclusions? Am I thinking in black and white terms? Am I expecting perfection? The key idea is that based on our previous experience of meditation practice, we probably will have already discovered some effective ways to relate differently and more creatively to negative thoughts when they arise. In the breathing space, we can now make use of those various approaches to remind ourselves that we are not our thoughts and that thoughts are not facts, even the ones that say they are. This reminder alone can have profound effects that accumulate over time. Option 4. The door of skillful action. A fourth choice we can make after the breathing space is to open the door of skillful action. We have emphasized the importance of bringing and accepting and allowing awareness to difficult and unpleasant experiences. But this new orientation does not mean we have to be passive. Often, the most appropriate response to unpleasant feelings, once we have acknowledged them, will be to take some considered action, to act on the basis of conscious choice. The motivation underlying our actions at these times will determine whether they turn out to be helpful or unhelpful. As we saw in the mouse in the maze experiment, the same action can have very different consequences depending on whether our motivation is based on avoidance or openness to experience. If we are driven to get rid of the unpleasant feelings, our actions will most likely backfire, digging us deeper into unhappiness. On the other hand, if we are motivated by genuine desire to take better care of ourselves, our actions can be a skillful way to bring greater ease and relief. Betty used the breathing space to find some more room for her needs in a pressure filled job. As an accountant, she felt herself most vulnerable around tax season and at the end of the fiscal year. This often meant long days and weekends at the office with little downtime. Recognizing that her last depression started under these circumstances, Betty made a point of going out in the afternoon to get a cup of her favorite blended coffee and would drink it while sitting on one of those tall bar stools watching the other customers. Sometimes she would pick up dinner at her neighborhood bistro to get some relief from cooking at home. In the past, I'd postpone going out until the pile of work I had to face was done, she said. What's new is that I realize now and not later that I need to slow down and take time for myself in the moments that really matter. Low mood particularly affects two sorts of activity. It makes the things we used to find pleasurable less enjoyable, causing us to lose interest in them or to give them up altogether. It also makes it difficult to stay on top of the daily tasks of living that may not give us pleasure, but do give us a sense of being responsible people exercising control in our own lives. In many ways, subtle and not so subtle, depression and low mood undermine us by robbing us of the energy to do the things that would nourish us the most. Simply engaging or re engaging in such activity can have unsuspected power. So, the fourth possibility, following a breathing space, is to intentionally choose to do something that would once have given us a pleasure, such as having a hot bath, going for a walk with a dog, visiting a friend, listening to music that makes us feel good, or B, a sense, no matter how small, of mastery, satisfaction, achievement, or control, such as clearing out a cupboard or drawer, doing something that we have been putting off, such as paying a bill, writing a letter to a family member or a friend, clearing off your desktop. Even a tiny amount of one such activity can give us a sense that we can have an effect in the world. And even a small effect can counteract the sense of helplessness and lack of control that often accompanies low mood. In the case of very anxious, fearful moods, it may be particularly helpful to take action by facing and taking on situations that we have hitherto avoided. It's also both helpful and realistic to break tasks down into smaller steps and tackle only one step at a time. In all cases, it's very helpful to remember to congratulate ourselves for completing a task or even part of a task. In exploring the most effective way to take action in responding mindfully to a depressed mood, it may be helpful to keep two things in mind. First, low mood undermines and reverses the motivation process itself. Normally, we can wait until we want to do something and then just do it. However, when we feel low, we actually have to mobilize ourselves and do something before we want to do it. Second, the tiredness and fatigue that occur in depression can be misleading. When we are not depressed, tiredness means we need to rest. In this case, rest refreshes us. The fatigue of depression, however, is often not normal tiredness. It may call not for rest, but for increased activity, if only for a short while. Rest can worsen the fatigue. Part of taking care of ourselves in such moments is to stay in the flow of life, to keep participating in normal activities, even if our mood and thoughts seem to say there's no point. The most challenging times are often when depression comes out of the blue, such as on waking up. Here, too, our initial response can be to start by taking a breathing space. It is also important to ask some specific questions. How can I best be kind to myself right now? What is the best gift I can give to myself at this moment? I do not know how long this mood will last, so how can I best look after myself until it passes? What would I do at this moment for someone I cared about who was feeling this way? How can I look after myself in the same way? Of course, even with the best of intentions, sometimes we won't be able to catch ourselves. It may feel that we have gone over an edge into a more persistent and intense negative mood state. At such times, it's important that, however weakly or fleetingly, we remember that the practice of mindfulness is still a healthy way to take care of ourselves. What we need at such times is actually no different from what we find helpful in responding mindfully to our less intense negative moods. Of course, it may be more challenging to relate differently to our negative thoughts in such moments. Perhaps even the impact of engaging in some mood lifting activity may be severely muted under the circumstances. Nevertheless, it is still better to bring whatever degree of mindfulness we can to this moment and take some appropriate action to care for ourselves than to sink further into a state of ruminative brooding. What we are saying here is that the task, when things are tough, is really to focus on each moment, to handle each moment as best we can. If our approach as to how we relate to a difficult moment shifts even by 1%, that is potentially an enormous shift to have made because it affects the next moment and the next moment and so on. So, one seemingly small change can have a surprisingly large impact down the road. The freedom to choose. In reflecting on what he had learned from his participation in the mindfulness program, Luis singled out the way in which he found the breathing space to be an important ally. I realized many things, but one I'd like to share. I've realized how much I really push myself. This is something I know how to do really well. So I spent lots of time thinking about how I would be able to recognize it. The 3-minute breathing space helps a lot, and I am doing it a number of times throughout the day. Sometimes 3 times, sometimes 5 times, sometimes whenever there is a big hesitation or not knowing, or when there are still 6 more things left to do and I have half an hour or an hour left to go. That's when it's really great. It really helps me just to sit, to do this acknowledgement, and then to hold this not knowing. Because sometimes I really don't know where this feeling of pressure comes from. Do I really have to push myself and say that in the next half an hour I will finish the project? Sometimes I just stay with, I don't know. And it's okay not to know. And it's okay also for me not to take an action to finish everything. Because it's so easy for me to take an action, and that's where a lot of stress in my life comes from. Just from taking too many actions, having too many things on my plate, and doing it all. Because I feel I won't go to sleep unless I do this, so everything is finished. I have to know it's completed. And sometimes it's just not necessary. This is very new for me, not to do certain things. And it feels okay. In a way, I'm also changing my attitude toward time. the time that I have, the time I can give myself for doing something. I think I am less frantic because of that. Louise was raising a very important point. There's no simple way to answer the question of what different people need. Some of us who are too busy may need to find a balance that involves stepping away from endless activity. Others might find we're not doing enough of the things we need to be doing. And so the problem is finding a way of balancing our lives so that we can be more engaged and enlivened at certain times. One way to begin is to bring awareness to where we are and to the feeling of what is going on with us right now. This gives us more sensitivity to appraise our inner and outer situation and condition accurately, not just cerebrally, but through mindful awareness. This awareness in turn expands the field of choices available to us and increases the likelihood that we will make healthy, wise, skillful choices rather than be carried along by the momentum of what we habitually do. The expansion of choices may be instantaneous and unexpected, as Kate found out when she picked up her 15-year-old son from school after having been away for a few days. I had forgotten how grumpy 15-year-olds can be, she said. I asked him how school had been that day. He said angrily, "You always ask the same thing." I paused, and I was aware of a feeling of contraction in my chest. It was very distinct. I recognized rising tension and irritation. I would normally have reacted. For Kate, somehow, just that pause, that instantaneous acknowledgement, gathering, and awareness of the body was enough to let the moment pass without reacting. I would usually have gotten angry at him or driven home in a cold silence, Kate went on. Instead, I turned to him and found myself saying, "I've missed you." And you know what? He turned to me and smiled. I had not seen that smile in ages. It was a miracle. The 3-minute breathing space is intended to provide us with just that kind of sensitivity and potential for choice when we come face to face with old patterns. These old patterns may relate to thinking about ourselves in a certain way, or dealing with our moods in unhealthy ways, or keeping ourselves insanely busy while blaming it on outside circumstances. Those habitual tendencies are still going to be here. Mindfulness practice will not instantly change all that, but what it can do is to give us a moment's pause and present us with choices we had not seen before. Our starting point can be centered with the breath, fully acknowledging where we are now, right in this moment. Otherwise, we can just be carried away as we always have been, reacting automatically. This is what Louise was realizing. "I actually appreciate the state of not knowing," he explained. "I really do, because it gives me a way of really pausing, and it opens my mind into right now. And somehow there is a moment when an idea comes to me, and then I say yes or no. But also, holding it in awareness is somehow important, rather than just doing something automatically, which is what I tend to do." In practicing using the breathing space regularly, we gradually see that there is a way of changing our relationship to ourselves and the world. We find we can have a new relationship to aspects of ourselves that we previously found difficult, and a new relationship to situations that we have been avoiding. Internal or external, these situations tend to evoke the same reaction in us: avoidance, escape, suppression. So as not to succumb to these unwise maneuvers, we turn toward whatever it is that has evoked these reactions, because our habitual reactions of aversion to what we find difficult are fundamental to what gets us stuck in unhappiness. This conscious response of turning towards such difficulties, even if merely a 1-degree turn in this direction, can bring about a fundamental shift in the way we live our lives.